fine too. All right. So I had told a few people here when we talked about what was happening today, I said, I'm going to share my story, and I'm going to share more of it than I have before at this church. And then after I was thinking and praying about that and putting this together, I thought that's probably not a good idea, because I know there's going to be some survivors here, and I don't want it to be any more triggering than it needs to be. So I've decided to go in a slightly different direction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and what happened, but I'm going to kind of focus on how I ended up speaking about it, because that's kind of what we're here for, surrendering the secret, and how that came about in my life. And then I'm going to talk about some of the lies that I believed that I think are common for survivors, and the truth that I learned. So that's how we're going to focus. So, as I said, my story is pretty typical of any survivor's story. The abuse that I suffered started around age 5 or 6. I'm not really sure. I was very young. I know that. And it went on until I was 15. And it was perpetrated by a man who was a friend of our family. He worked with my dad, and he lived 2 blocks from my house. And he was a typical perpetrator. He was very charismatic. He was well-known and well-liked, and no one would have ever believed that he could do such a thing. He was a pillar of the community. He was the go-to guy. If anybody needed anything, he was the guy that you would go to. And he was also a deacon in his church. And so my abuse started around age 5, and it went on, and it kind of changed a little bit over time, got a little more intense. And so somewhere around age 13, I decided I should probably tell my mom what's going on. So I did, in my very limited vocabulary. You have to know, I didn't have a dad at home. My dad had left when I was 3, so I didn't grow up with a dad at home. I didn't have brothers, didn't know anything about male anatomy. My mother didn't tell us anything. So I wasn't really sure what I was telling her, but I think she got it. But her reaction was, "You just misunderstood him. He's just overly friendly with everybody." And so I kind of realized at that point that I guess this is just going to be my life. This is what life is going to be. And I kind of felt like I was falling into like a dark hole. And I just wasn't sure where that bottom was going to be. So things progressed. And then at age 15, I had an interaction with them that I could tell was going to change my life. It was a little more violent, and somehow I got my little less than 5 foot tall, less than 100-pound frame out from under him and got away. And I ran home, and I just ran up to my room, and I just laid there and sobbed on my bed, because I thought, not only is this my life and this dark hole that I'm falling into, it now felt like that dark hole was like physical, like it was pulling me in. I wasn't just falling anymore. I was being pulled into this dark hole, and I just felt like I had no hope at all. Well, the next day, I had just come home from church. I was getting changed in my room, and my sister called up the stairs, "There's someone here to see you." So I came downstairs, and I could just tell through the crack in the door that it was a man standing on my front steps in a suit. I thought, oh, Dad stopped by after church. He sometimes did that. And but when I came around the corner, it was this man. And I knew, again, that this was a whole new level. He had never come to my house. And I responded with the freeze response, and I just couldn't move. And I couldn't understand exactly what he was saying to me, but I could tell he wanted me to go somewhere with him. And I thought to myself, if I go, my life is over as I know it. And I didn't know what to do. And I was still frozen. I was definitely that freeze response that I learned about later in life. And then all of a sudden, there was someone standing between us. And yes, I will cry at this. His name was Joe. He was my sister's boyfriend. He was at the other end of my living room that this man could not see at the door at one end. And Joe stood up when he heard what was going on. And he came over. And again, I don't know what he said. I couldn't make out what he said. I just knew it was very threatening. And that man turned around and ran back to his car and left. And little Joe, which I have to tell you, Joe was little. He wasn't much bigger than me. We were the same age. We knew each other from elementary school. And he was blonde hair and blue eyes and about 5'3". And just a little guy, little wiry guy. But you know what? He took a stand that day. And he said, this isn't going to happen anymore. And whatever it was he said, it worked. And he turned around to me and he said, that man will never touch you again. But if he does, tell me and I'll protect you. And I thought, as I went back up to my room, I didn't say anything to him. I just turned around, went back up to my room, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I have a protector. That was a turning point, because Joe was right. That man never touched me again. I want you to hear that. He was a 15-year-old, wiry little guy, and he stood there, and he made a difference. When I wrote my book, I wrote it from a different perspective. When I say perspective, I'm saying I'm old. And I have a lot of years to look back and see what God has done. And so I wrote it from the perspective of the heroes that I saw God put in my life. At every stage of my life, it seemed that God put someone who protected me from that dark hole. Joe being the most important one. Anybody can be a hero. I want you to hear that. Anybody can be, if you'll take a stand and say, no, this isn't going to happen anymore. So, a year later, God called me to himself, and I became saved at age 16. And again, my life completely changed. I completely changed. I read the Bible. I devoured the Bible. I stayed up late at night reading my Bible. I couldn't get enough because I saw verses like 2 Corinthians 5:17 that said, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. That's who I was. I was a new person. Everything from before had passed away, and I was a new creation, and that was exciting to me. I read Colossians 3:3, for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. That's where I got the title for my book, Hidden with Christ, because I realized that that's who I was. I was new, and my old life was hidden. It was gone. It had passed away. A year after that, I started dating Doug, who would become my husband. I told him about the abuse. And I did that because I didn't know how it was going to affect our relationship. I had no idea. I had never had a boyfriend before, and I just didn't know. So I told him about it in a letter that I put in the mailbox, in his mailbox, because there were no computers or cell phones or anything. This is how we did it in the olden days. You wrote a letter with a pen and folded it up and gave it to him. And again, I think it's because I didn't really want to tell him, and I didn't really want to see his reaction when he found out. But he was precious. He talked to me the next day, and he said, look, I don't know what this means. I don't know how it will affect us. But I'm here, and I'm going to be here. And he's still there. So he's fabulous. And 3 years after we started dating, 3.5, after 2, not 1, but 2 failed attempts to get my mother's blessing that we could get married, we finally did get married, May 25th, 1985. A year after that, we had the first of our 3 sons, Jason, And a year after that, we bought our first house, a little Cape Cod in Allentown. I was so happy. I realized through reading my Bible that Satan wanted to destroy my life. And he came close. There was a time between that telling my mom and the abuse ending that I definitely was suicidal. I had a plan too, and I thought it was a pretty good plan, but I didn't think it was foolproof. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want to make sure it's going to work, because I don't want to end up maimed. That would be even worse than the situation I was already in if I had to live that way for the rest of my life. So I abandoned the plan, and it was just after that God saved me. So, this is Satan. He's the thief. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But God, I wear this little charm every time I speak that says "but God" on it, because there's a lot of that happened in my life. Jesus came that we would have life and have it abundantly. So at that point in my life, my past was so far from me, it was like it had happened to somebody else. And you know what, I kind of picture it like I packaged it all up in a little box, and tied it up and stuck it on a shelf in the farthest, darkest corner of my heart and mind, and it was never to be heard from again. I mean, I had everything I wanted. I had a great husband, I had this beautiful little boy, I had a cute little house, and so my life was perfect. And that's the end of my story. Thanks for having me. No, you know that's not what happened, or we wouldn't be here. So what happened was I went on a women's retreat. It's so dangerous to do that kind of thing. I went on a women's retreat with our church, and one of the speakers was talking about resentment, and when she did that, this man's face popped into my mind, and I thought, maybe I really haven't dealt with that like I should have. And since I had never told anybody else, I thought maybe I should tell some of my friends that are here with me at the retreat, because this was a safe place to do that. They were friends and all of that. So I told 2 friends that were with me, and they were shocked. They were completely silent, which, if you know any of my friends, that is not right. They are never silent. So they just looked at me in this shock and silence, and then one of them said, if he's ever arrested, you're going to have to tell the police your story. And I just laughed. I was like, well, he's never going to be arrested. My abuse ended 10 years before, and I'm sure he was still abusing. He had retired from the job that he worked with my dad and became a school bus driver. I'm sure he's still abusing. He's never going to be caught. But I left that retreat feeling a lot lighter, like a burden had been lifted. I thought that was a really good thing to share that with my friends. And so I was really happy that I did that, and came home and thought, life would go on as it had been, except that one of those friends called me that morning. All right, retreat ladies, Monday morning retreat stupor. You know it? Okay. So that's where I was. And besides that, she called at like 6:30 in the morning. I will never understand morning people, ever. It just won't happen. I am not a morning person, and I don't get why they think they can talk to you at 6:30 in the morning. But she called, and she does not go for small talk. So when I answered the phone, she said, "Was the man who abused you named Mr. So-and-so?" And I was like, now I'm wide awake. And I was like, "How do you know that? I didn't tell you his name." And she said, "It's in this morning's paper. He was arrested over the weekend." I was like, "What?" So that very moment, probably, that I was telling my friends my story for the first time, he was being arrested in another case. And she said, "You have to call the police." And I thought, I don't know who I have to call, but I know I'm not calling anybody at 6:30 in the morning. So I thought, well, I have some time, and my husband suggested I call our pastor's wife and get her advice. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. So since it was still so early, I sat down with my Bible, because I was planning to start a new Bible study that day in 2 Corinthians. So I opened my Bible to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Do you know what that says? I see those nods. I didn't know what it was going to say. And the paraphrase of it is that things in life happen to you so that you can comfort others with the comfort that you've received from God. And I read that chapter, and I closed my Bible, and I said, no. Nope, not happening. I am never talking about this. I might call the police if my pastor's wife thinks that's a good idea. But that's it. I am never talking about this. And I got in this argument with God. Have you ever gotten in an argument with God? I've done it a few times. His side is very, very quiet. My side's very, very noisy. But after about an hour of him being very quiet, I finally said, okay, Lord, if that's what you want to use, because I gave him a lot of other options. I have tons of baggage we could talk about. We don't need that one. There's other things. But no, that's what he wanted. So I said, okay, if that's what you want me to talk about, or that's what you want me to comfort others with, I'll do it, but you're going to have to give me an extra measure of grace to get through it. So what was supposed to remain a secret started coming out. Of course, my pastor's wife suggested I call the police and talk to them, and I did that. And I could just tell that God had found that box that I had shoved to the back part of my memory closet, and he was pulling it out, he had untied it, and he was shaking the contents of it all over my life. I was not too happy about it, but I was trusting him. By the time I met with the police, which was maybe, 2 weeks later, they said they did want to talk to me, because it was very important to their case if they could come up with a timeline. And so I met with them a couple weeks later, and when I did that, I found out that dozens of women at that point had come forward and said a very similar story. But the really sad thing was, after they talked to me, they said, we really want to use you as part of the trial. Because if he's convicted, and it was a great big if, this was his first offense. So they didn't think he would be convicted. But if he was, my testimony might give them something to look at when they did the sentencing phase. And so what I found out was, of those dozens of women, they could only use 2 as witnesses, because only 2 of those women, me and one other woman, matched his character. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Well, his defense is his great character. And he's got a lot of character witnesses, including his pastor. And there's really only 2 of you that we could put on a witness stand whose character can match up to his. I thought, how sad, because their character is probably what it is because of what he did to them. But that's how it was. So a few weeks after that, I had to share my testimony in our church because my husband and I were taking over charge of the youth group, and they wanted us to share our testimonies with the whole congregation. And we had been there maybe 3 or 4 years at that point. And my pastor wanted me to share this part of my story in my testimony, and I was like, oh, no. That's a bad idea. Now, you have to remember, this was 35 years ago. I'm old, remember? So 35 years ago, nobody was talking about sexual abuse, especially not the church, especially not on a Sunday morning from the pulpit. So I tried to convince him it was a bad idea. But who knew that I didn't know that little old Dutchman was a Renaissance man, because he kind of insisted that I do that. So I was like, okay, I'll try. So I shared my testimony the way I always did, and then I had just like a couple sentences at the end, and I did it like this. And I just read those sentences, and it said something like, most of my childhood I had been molested, and that man was now arrested, and pray for me because I might have to go to trial in the next year and face him. And that's all I said. And I looked up, and most of the congregation was no longer looking at me. Their heads were down. The ones who were looking at me looked like they had died. Their faces were white. They didn't know what to say. There were some mouths hanging open. And I got off that stage area like this one really quick and sat down next to my husband and thought, I told you this was a bad idea. And he leaned over and he said, you did great. You should be a professional speaker. And I was like, oh, that'll never happen. Oh, but here we are. So, what have I learned? Well, I've learned that Satan is a liar. He uses a lot of the same lies for all survivors. So I'm going to talk about some that he used in my life that are common, that I know are common to other survivors. So, but first I want to talk about that term, survivor, because that's what I think of when I hear the word survivor. Is that silly little cat? When I was a kid in the 70s, I had a poster like this. There's a little cat hanging on by his toenails, and it said, "Hang in there, baby Friday's coming." Do you remember that? Yeah, they were pretty popular. And that's what I think of when I hear the word survivor. And I guess it's just me because of how I grew up like that. Because surviving is a good thing. I mean, you survived cancer. That's a great thing. If I die first, my husband will have survived me, and he should get an award for that, let me tell you. So, yeah, surviving is a good thing, but I would prefer the word like overcomer or Satan butt kicker. I don't know. But since Satan butt kicker is not appropriate to say in church, we'll just use the term survivor and I will deal with it. But the first lie I believed, and probably the one that held me captive the longest, was this one, that it was my fault. The abuser told me it was my fault. When my mom said I misunderstood him, it told me it was my fault. When I gave my statement to the police, one of the questions that they asked me was, "Did you do anything to encourage his behavior?" And I said no. I answered no. But that last time, I was wearing a bathing suit and shorts coming home from the pool, so maybe it was my fault. And I was a cute little thing then, So maybe it was my fault. But the truth is, it was not my fault. And if you take nothing else away from today, take this. It was not your fault either. Anytime something happens to a child, the adult is always responsible. A child cannot give consent. That is not a thing. So no matter what they've done, what they wore, where they were, what they were doing, it's never the child's responsibility. I want you also to know that all abuse is an abuse of power. So there could be abuse between adults if one of them has more power than the other. And that could be anything. It could be gender, could be physical strength, financial position, authority, like an employer or a pastor or a father. Anytime there's an imbalance of power, abuse can occur. And it's never the victim's fault. Related to that lie, that it was my fault, was the shame that Satan used. Now, there's a difference between shame and guilt. Guilt says you did something bad, and sometimes you need to know that. But shame says I am bad, and that's what Satan did in my life. If the abuse was my fault, did that mean I wanted it to happen? And if I did, does that mean that the evil is in me? Is that where that came from? I am the evil? And that's what shame said. And then as I got older in this abuse, and my body responded positively to his touch, if what he was doing was evil and I responded in a positive way, that must mean that I'm evil. That's how the shame piled up. But the truth is that God created sex to be a good thing, a beautiful thing. But Satan, in his efforts to steal, kill, and destroy, remember, he takes something that God has designed to be good and beautiful, and he makes it bad and ugly. He couldn't destroy me through the abuse itself, so he tried to destroy me through the shame and the effects of that. Remember, please, reacting to physical touch is just a physiological reaction. It's the way God designed our bodies to work. It does not mean you have an emotional connection to an abuser or that you wanted it to happen. It was not your fault. You are not the evil. Shame belongs to the abuser, not me and not you. As a Christian, God's promises belong to me. Romans 8:1, there is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. I can stand before God uncondemned. One of the key verses for me at that time was Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I realized when I looked at that and when I read it over and over again, that the cross didn't just cover my sin, which it did, it also covered my past. And it rendered it dead. And if it was dead, it could not have control of my life. And when I came to understand that, that really opened up doors for me of healing and of freedom. So let's look at the next lie. The next lie was that God abandoned me. He turned his back. He could have kept the abuse from happening, but he didn't. So he's either not loving or not sovereign. That was the lie that I heard. But the truth is, God is everywhere at all times. He never turns away. He was there with me. He was there with you in everything, which is why I think any of us survive it all, by the way. But if you were a Christian at the time of your abuse, think about this. He wasn't just with you, he was in you, experiencing the abuse with you. That's kind of a crazy concept. But either way, his heart grieved for you. I don't have a slide for it because naturally I added more after I gave Ben my slides. But I want you to listen to Psalm 22. Verse 1 says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? If that's how you're feeling, you have to read the rest of the psalm. Jesus said those words on the cross, and we often get the impression that he was saying that God turned away from him. But I don't think Jesus thought that at all. I think he was actually leading the Jews who were watching that crucifixion. I think because they knew that psalm well, they sung it all the time. It's like if I say to you, Jesus loves me, this I know, you're going to say, for the Bible tells me, very good. See, I knew you would know that one. I picked one I knew you would know. I think that's exactly what Jesus was doing. I think he was probably too weak in his physical condition to say any more of the psalm, but he only had to start the first verse, right? And then they would remember the rest of the psalm, because the rest of that psalm talks about his hands and feet being pierced. It talks about people mocking him, people casting lots for his clothing. Does that sound familiar? It was happening right in front of them. And he started telling them that psalm. And their minds had to go to that, didn't they? But then if you get to verse 24, Psalm 22, it says, for he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him. Jesus knew God had not forsaken him in his absolute worst moment, and he won't forsake you either, and he never forsook me. Joseph is another great example. God was with him and rescued him. It says that in Acts 7, verses 9 and 10. But think about that. God was with Joseph and rescued him, because that means he was with him in the pit, and he rescued him by selling him into slavery. He was with him as a slave and rescued him by putting him in prison. And finally, he was with him in prison and rescued him by making him second only to Pharaoh, where he had the opportunity to rescue a whole lot of other people. His story has purpose. Our story has purpose. God doesn't waste anything. Every story has purpose. He not only rescued all of the people of Egypt, he rescued his own brothers who started this whole thing. And so when the Bible tells us that his brothers, and I think Satan too, meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And he doesn't say God used it for good or he turned it into good. He said he meant it for good. It had purpose all along. Survivors who have come to a place of healing often say they wouldn't change their story for anything because of all the good that came out of it. or that they feel such a closeness to God that they might not have otherwise. The world says when they give you lemons, you should make lemonade, right? Make lemonade out of lemons, or find a silver lining. The Bible talks about it much more dramatically. Things like finding hidden treasures in dark places, a testimony of God's grace, abundant life, creating beauty from ashes, and gladness from mourning. So much better than lemonade. I just want to tell you, don't get stuck in the why. Everything has purpose, but don't get stuck there. Just be assured that God had a purpose and that you can trust him. So the next lie, did I get it? Yes. My abuse must remain a secret. People will look at me differently and I will lose friends. And the truth of that is, well, people may look at you differently. And yes, you may lose friends. Remember how people reacted to me the first time I said it. And some of those people who reacted that way the first time I told my story didn't talk to me for months. Some who were my friends didn't talk to me for about 4 months afterwards because they just didn't know what to do with it. You know what? That's okay. I know it's hard. But the truth is that sin flourishes in darkness. Exposing the darkness is our responsibility, both individually and as the church. Ephesians 5:11 says, "Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them." And Paul wrote that to the church specifically addressing sexual immorality. So we're supposed to expose this, and why do we do that is by telling people about it. The Bible tells us that darkness is light to God. I love that thought, because he sees everything. Nothing is dark. Nothing's hidden from him. And I thought about this when I have a little dog at home. His name is Sasquatch. He's 15 pounds. He doesn't live up to his name at all, but he's really cute. And when I put him out at night for the last time, it's usually late, because I'm a night person, not a morning person. Let's remember that. When I put him out the last time at night, we live way in the woods, and it's very dark. And I have the lights on in the house. So when I open the door to let him out, do you think that the darkness comes in and swallows up the light? No. When I open that door, the light floods out, and it exposes everything outside, and that darkness disappears. Now, at my house, that's a good thing, because I live way out in the woods, and the toads start jumping away, and the other stuff that might be out there moves along, so I can get him out and back in again without any incident. But that's how I picture it. That's how I picture God's light. It just exposes everything, and it just chases that darkness away, and darkness cannot stand up under it. I also think that sharing your story will help you heal. Tamar was told to keep silent by her brother Absalom when she was raped by Amnon. And the Bible tells us that she lived as a desolate woman in her brother's house. The definition of desolate is in a state of bleak and dismal emptiness. And maybe you've been there. I know I have. That describes a lot of survivors who suffer silently. So sharing your story will help you heal. And each time you share your story, you get a little more courageous. Your courage will grow. But what will maybe be even more important, you might give courage to somebody else to share their story and begin their healing journey. Remember, it was a teenage girl that accused the man who abused me, and dozens of grown women came forward to say he abused me too, because what she did validated what happened to them. And it gave them enough courage to come forward and said, yeah, I was abused too. All right, the next lie is I can never get back all that was lost. Well, I want to go that way. The truth is, I can't change the past. But God is all about restoration, and I love that. He sought to restore man's relationship with him after the fall. Let's face it, Adam and Eve would have stayed hidden, would they not? In their shame. But he sought them out, desiring to restore that relationship, culminating in sending his son, so that we can have a restored relationship with him as well. One use of the word restoration is when a broken bone is healed. A broken bone is reset into place and then given time to heal. And often when that healing takes place, well, it becomes useful again for one thing, but sometimes it's also stronger than it was before. God doesn't turn back the clock, but I think another way he restores is he restores a childhood in childlike faith. That wonder and joy, as we come to discover more about God, we get excited about that, like a child would when they have a new discovery. And I think he gives us that as we learn his truth. And remember, it's his truth that will set you free. All right, I don't have time today to go into Joel, the book of Joel. I'd like to, but I don't. So read it on your own, because it's all about restoration. And this verse was always really special to me. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, that I am the Lord your God, and there is no other. My people will never be put to shame. That's something I love to hear from God. And it's not just here. He says that several times in his word, that we will no longer be put to shame. The last lie I'm going to talk about is this one. You're too broken to be used by God, because that was one I believed for a very long time, and that I have no worth because of what happened to me. But the truth is, my worth comes from being made in God's image, and that cannot be tarnished. God shines his glory through our brokenness. I'm going to say that again. God shines his glory through our brokenness. 2 Corinthians 4, 6 and 7 says, "For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us." We are jars of clay. We have cracks, pieces missing, broken places. But those dark places are where God's glory will shine through, those cracks, those empty spots, if we'll just let him do it. The real truth is, he can't really use you until you're broken. In David's psalm of repentance from his sin with Bathsheba in Psalm 51, he asks what sacrifices God delights in. And he says, the sacrifice of a broken and contrite heart. That's where we all need to be used of God. When you're broken, you see more clearly your need for God. And there is this special closeness, our hearts to God's heart, I think, when we're broken. Psalm 34:16 says, "God is near to the brokenhearted and save those crushed in spirit." Well, God is everywhere and saves lots of people. So he's near to everyone, but there's something special. There's a special nearness when you're brokenhearted. There is a Japanese art called kintsugi. I don't know if you've seen this. I love this. I first heard about this from Johnny Erickson Tada many, many years ago, and I've used it ever since. But when a piece of pottery is broken, it's repaired using precious metals, gold, silver, or platinum. This is not when you broke your mom's favorite coffee mug and then tried to glue that handle back on and not leave any sign that you broke it. That's not what this is. Nope. This is an art form. And they want those cracks to show because they're going to repair it with something precious. And it's going to accentuate the cracks. And then the repaired pottery is considered more beautiful and more valuable than it was before it was broken. It's such a beautiful example, I think. But for us local folks, we have a pretty cool example of that here at Asher's Chocolates. Yes, we do. And by the way, they are 10 minutes down the road. I know this because they are on my way home from Bible study every Wednesday, and I have a frequent flyer card, just saying. But they have something called hurt candy. Have you seen that? Have you gotten the hurt candy? Yes. The hurt candy is candy that's not quite right, and then they sell it cheaper. And it doesn't have the pretty packaging that their other candy does, but it's just as good. And my favorite are the chocolate-covered hurt pretzels. Yes, right? Well, they are hurt because they're either broken pieces or they have too much chocolate, as if that's a thing. Right? So to me, I like them even more because they got a little too much chocolate on them. And in case you didn't see it yet, over on my table, I have a Kintsugi replica bowl. It's not a real one. I don't have that kind of money. But it's filled with Asher's hurt pretzels. So make your way over there because there's more that don't fit in the bowl, and I can't take all those home. So I talk a good game, but I really eat sugar-free. So what I do with my frequent flyers points, I don't know what to call them, but I get the sugar-free chocolate-covered pretzels because they are really hard to find in the hurt section. They go really, really fast, so I save up my points to get those for free at Asher's and give everybody else my candy. All right. So there you go. I want you to remember a few things. 1, it's not your fault. 2 is God loves you and will never leave you. God will restore you and give you a good future. God will shine his glory through your brokenness. And, oh, look what I did. Hope in God is a sure thing, and you can have an abundant life free from your past. And just look at those faces. Are they not adorable? Those are 3 of my 9 grandchildren, and they're just there to make you smile. Because I think a talk like this should always end with a smile. So there they are. They're precious. Noel, Everly, and Isaiah. And we were doing a video to send a happy birthday message to one of their cousins in California, and they're just so cute. I was like, I got to include you guys on my thing. All right. That's where we're going to stop here, and then I'm looking at my clock. We're going to take another break, and we're going to rearrange things a little bit, so it's not going to be a long break. But please, if you want to talk to them, if you want to have some Hertz pretzels from my table, go take those. And then we're going to come back for questions and answers, and we're going to have David and myself, and Leah is going to join us as well, one of our support group leaders in the area. So I'm going to pray you out with this verse, and I'm going to leave it right up there so you can see it too, because I think what we all really want is joy, peace, and hope. And this verse, I think, sums that up. So that's how I'm going to pray. So let's do that. Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. All right, folks, grab some more things to drink. Bathrooms are straight down this hallway. Resource tables over here. And yeah, David and I are also available to talk and sell books. Thank you. Come back in